This is 11.3, Life During Wartime. Our objectives is explain African Americans' role in the struggle to end slavery. The second is describe the conditions that the Union and the Confederate soldiers endured. First, we're looking at African American soldiers. Now, African American soldiers were still quite an important part of the Civil War. African Americans were 1% of the northern population. There were many more African Americans in the South because of slavery. By the end of the war, we have 10% of the soldiers in the Union's army are African American. Now remember, we discussed the Emancipation Proclamation last week. Well, many of these slaves that were freed, they're the same ones who are entering into the army. Now, it's to be clear that if you were fighting in a war, you were being paid. And there's a difference between the pay. So white soldiers, they were being paid more than African American soldiers. And there's also a limit in the rank of African American soldiers as well. So we're seeing that even though these African Americans are not free, they're still being paid less than white soldiers. Also, as far as generals, we could not have an African American general at this point. There's sort of a limit to how far African Americans can work their way into the military. There's a very high mortality rate for these soldiers, and many of it is because of disease. Now, the reason why these soldiers end up suffering from disease is because they're being given jobs where disease is more likely. For example, they're getting sort of the labor jobs in the garrison. They're the ones who have to take care of food and stuff like that. Another reason why many African American soldiers died was that if they were caught by Confederate soldiers, they were immediately executed. They were immediately killed. They were not treated as prisoners of war or POWs like the white soldiers. Here we have is a depiction of a battle during the Civil War, and as you can see, we have some of these African American soldiers fighting in the war. On this side, we have the Confederates. As you can see, all the Confederates are white. They are not accepting African Americans into their army for the obvious reason. Then we have the event at Fort Pillow. This is in Tennessee. Here we have our many African American soldiers or prisoners of war. They are executed by the Confederates. Slave resistance. So the slaves have sort of clued in that the Union troops are on their side. And so they're making it especially hard for their slave owners. While the Union Army is sort of advancing in the South, we have the slaves, they're trying to sabotage these plantations. Basically, they're not taking good care of the livestock, they're not doing their jobs very well, and when many of the slave owners flee because the Union Army is coming for them, the slaves refuse to go. So this is sort of another element of what's happening during this war. If you have a chance at freedom and you know that someone's coming to free you, you're going to try your best to make sure you become free. You're not going to follow your slave owner. Now, while many people were sort of ready to start this war at the beginning, they become disillusioned. And what this means is not only are a lot of people dying in the Civil War, but life is hard. We have the way that the soldiers are living, it's rough. They have things like poor hygiene. They don't have proper showers or proper water. They have a lack of water, so there's not even enough water for all the soldiers to drink. We have poor sanitation. That means there's no proper place for them to go to the bathroom. Poor diet. That means they don't really have very good food to eat. So not only are they fighting all day, they don't even have a very good supper to eat at night. And all of these things, they end up leading to disease. So we have soldiers being killed in battle, but we also have soldiers being killed because they don't have water, they don't know where to shower, and disease spreads easily because of that. Here's an example of some of the camps that these soldiers would be living in during this war. As you can see, inside these tents, we have a lot of men sort of smushed in. Here we have is what it would look like. They're eating. They're making open fire food. Again, another picture. So this is sort of the life during the war. The last thing is prisons. If you imagine that camp life was bad, well, prisons were going to be even worse. There's going to be less food, less water, and no one's cleaning up anything. During this war, we have about 3,500,000 soldiers on both sides. About 400,000 of them end up becoming prisoners at some point during this war, and 50,000 of them end up dying in prisons. And they're dying because of wounds that are not being treated, disease that's spreading because of the close quarters, and poor sanitation. One particularly bad prison was Andersonville. This was an open-air prison. There was no protection from nature. The same water that they used to go to the bathroom in was the same water that they used to drink from. So if you can imagine, you might have some nasty waste in your drinking water. That is the type of water they're drinking. This is guarded by old men and boys, people who are not necessarily the most equipped to go to war. And they're ordered to shoot anybody who crosses this no-go line. Here's an example of some of these skeletal prisoners at Andersonville. Your question for this section is, I would like you to discuss how African Americans were being treated in the war as soldiers.